352 million gallons. That's how much water one building drank in a single year. Google's data center campus in Henderson, Nevada, in 2024. Not estimated, reported. Enough to run 540 homes for 12 months, pulled by a set of server halls sitting a few miles from a lake that just posted its lowest reading in 90 years. 540 homes worth of water. None of those homes exist. Nobody showers there. Nobody waters a lawn there. The water still leaves the lake exactly the same. An earlier video from this channel told you AI wasn't touching Lake Mead's water, that the real build-out sits 400 miles north on a completely different river. That was true. It still is for that cluster. It's not true for this one. Bronson Mack speaks for the Las Vegas Valley Water District, the utility that actually delivers water to these buildings, not a think tank guessing from a spreadsheet. Asked where Southern Nevada's data centers get their water, he didn't hedge. The vast majority, if not all of them, draw straight from the Colorado River. The same river that fills Lake Mead, the same intake pipes serving the taps of 2.3 million people. Picture what that facility actually looks like from the road. Rows of low, windowless buildings, humming behind a chain-link fence, cooling towers venting a faint haze of steam into desert air that's already short on moisture to begin with. Nothing about it looks like a straw in a lake. That's exactly why it took a public records request, not a site visit, to prove it was one. So why did an earlier round of coverage on this crisis manage to leave that fact out? Partly because it's easy to check the wrong data centers, partly because the ones actually sitting on Lake Mead's own water don't advertise it. Google's Henderson facility isn't hiding. It was simply built before February 2024, the month regulators finally banned the thirstiest kind of cooling system for anything new, which means the old system stays grandfathered in, running exactly as it always has. It just never had to say the number out loud until a public records request pulled it out. Here's the number in full: 23 data centers across southern Nevada. Google, Switch, Flexential, and a growing list of names most residents couldn't identify, used 716 million gallons in 2024. That's enough water for 4,395 single-family homes for a full year, consumed by buildings that don't have a single family living in any of them. Picture that as a line of houses. Over 4,000 of them, standing empty, taps running, nobody home. Except the water's real, and it's not going to houses. It's going to servers training the next model update. Compare that to the lake itself. Lake Mead currently holds roughly 6.9 million acre-feet, in a basin engineered to hold nearly 26 million at full pool, a reservoir already running on barely a quarter of its own name. Data centers, 716 million gallons, works out to about 2,200 acre-feet against that. A sliver, not a flood. Small enough that officials can say, honestly, that data centers aren't the reason the lake is dying. They're not lying when they say that. They're just not finishing the sentence. So finish it. If the amount is small today, why does every fight over the next data center get this loud? Because nobody's arguing about today's number. They're arguing about the next one, and the one after that, before any of them show up on a chart. Because the sliver is growing, and nothing else pulling from this lake is growing anywhere near that fast. Flexential's North Las Vegas site alone used 20 million gallons, up from a fraction of that a few years earlier, with no sign of leveling off. Kyle Rowring, who runs the Great Basin Water Network, put the trend in plain terms. AI, at least today's AI for data centers, is very energy intensive. Water follows power. Every new campus means more of both, pulled from the same shrinking account at the exact moment the account is running its lowest balance in history. Even Flexential's own president, Ryan Mallory, doesn't pretend otherwise. There's nothing you can do on this scale that won't get you put under a microscope. You've probably already guessed where the next one's going. 88.5 acres in Boulder City. The town Hoover Dam itself was built to house, back when the dam needed somewhere for its construction crews to sleep. A single proposed AI data center campus, close enough to the reservoir that residents could watch the survey stakes go in from the same overlooks tourists use to photograph the dam. Nobody in town found out through a press release. They found out at a planning meeting, in a room that filled up faster than the city expected, and more than 2,000 of them signed a petition against it before a single vote happened. 2,000 signatures in a city of barely 15,000 people. That's not a fringe complaint. That's roughly one resident in 7 standing up to say no. In a town this size, that's not a petition. That's practically a neighborhood meeting. The city's own planning commission looked at that project and recommended denying it. Case closed. Not even close. Boulder City isn't the only town having this exact argument. 200 miles southeast, in Tucson, residents fought off a 290-acre data center campus called Project Blue, proposed by a firm named Beale Infrastructure on water that also traces back to the Colorado River system. Same fight, different zip code, which means this isn't one angry town overreacting to one company. It's the same collision happening on a loop, anywhere this river still reaches. Because while that one project sat rejected, Boulder City's council put a much bigger question on the ballot. Not for one company, but for the entire El Dorado Valley transfer area, over 100,000 acres of desert the city has owned since 1995. Question 1. Voters decide November 3rd. Should data centers be allowed there at all? City estimates put the potential lease revenue at $1.336 billion over 70 years. A developer tied to a Houston energy firm is already circling, promising low-water cooling strategies in the paperwork. One data center got voted down by a room full of angry neighbors. The policy that could open the door to a dozen more is now in the hands of everyone in town, on a single Tuesday in November. Before you decide that's just small-town NIMBY politics dressed up as a water fight, ask yourself something. Would your vote look any different if that ballot measure landed on your own street, tied to your own water bill? Let's be fair to the other side of this, because it exists. Boulder City already diverts more than 1 million gallons of treated wastewater a day into evaporation ponds, water that currently does nothing but sit in the sun and disappear. The Water Authority is studying whether that same effluent could be piped back to Lake Mead instead, as a return flow credit, partly offsetting whatever a data center draws. New construction is barred from the worst water-hungry cooling systems already. Push a project toward air cooling instead of evaporation, and you genuinely do save water. You just spend more electricity doing it, on a grid already straining under the same growth. On paper, there's a version of this where growth and conservation move together. On paper, not yet in the ground. Every mitigation on that list is a plan, a study, a proposal. The only number that's actually measured and locked in is 716 million gallons, already spent, already gone, before a single one of these fixes has been built. So who's actually trying to close that gap today with a shovel instead of a press release? Not a state agency, not the company itself. 4 engineering seniors at UNLV, Adrian Montenegro, Alyssa Surette, Daniel Navarez and Elias Black, looked at Google's own Henderson site for a class project and found something almost nobody outside a hydrology department would think to check. Directly underneath the data center sits a shallow layer of groundwater, salty and full of dissolved solids, useless for drinking, refilling itself at 120 gallons a minute whether anyone touches it or not. Nobody was using it. It was just sitting there, under a parking lot, doing nothing. Their senior project, priced at around $300,000, a rounding error next to what the facility behind it is worth, proposes running that water through filtration and feeding it straight into the cooling system. The number they landed on, enough to offset roughly 22% of the facility's total draw. It's nuisance groundwater that's not dealt with because it has such a high amount of solids, Surette said, describing water everyone else had written off as worthless. 22%. From 4 students with a capstone budget against a company running one of the most valuable infrastructure build-outs on the planet. Montenegro put the imbalance more bluntly than his professors probably wanted on the record. People are attracted by the financial gain. But what they're forgetting is that people still live in this city. That's the whole fight in one sentence from someone who isn't getting paid to say it. 4 students found 22% of a fix in a parking lot. Nobody's found the other 78. Zoom out from Henderson and the same math is playing out a state over. Arizona is staring down a possible 77% cut to its own Colorado River supply, a number this channel has already walked through in detail. And in the middle of that, Governor Katie Hobbs isn't asking data centers to use less. She's lobbying federal negotiators to recognize data centers as an essential industry in the Colorado River talks, the same conversation deciding how deep those cuts actually land, while floating a penny a gallon fee as the trade-off. Arizona currently has 98 data centers running and 86 more in the pipeline. 98 operating, 86 more coming, in a state that just found out it might lose more than 3/4 of its river water. So which one actually gets the seat at the table? The family whose tap pressure drops, or the 98 buildings with a governor lobbying on their behalf? Officially, that's still being negotiated. Unofficially, only one of those two has someone in the room arguing its case. And this is still the small version of the number. Basin-wide combined data center cooling and the power generation needed to run them could demand close to 89,700 acre-feet a year by 2035, according to regional water forecasts. 90,000 acre-feet isn't a sliver anymore. That's nearly double what the federal government just forced Nevada to cut from its own entire allocation. Except this time, it's demand walking in the front door, not a shortage forcing anyone out the back. Nobody voted on that federal negotiation. Boulder City residents get to vote on theirs, on November 3rd, on a ballot most of the country will never hear about, deciding whether the town Hoover Dam was built to house becomes the next place this exact fight replays at a much bigger scale. That vote hasn't happened yet. Nobody knows which way Boulder City breaks. What's already certain is smaller and harder to walk back. The water's already being used, the buildings pulling it are still being built, and every study promising a fix is still just a study, sitting next to a number, 716 million gallons, that was never a proposal at all. Start this video over, and the number was 352 million. One building, 1 year, one lake outside the window, getting lower the entire time anyone argued about whether that number even mattered. It mattered enough for 4 college students to spend a semester trying to claw back 22% of it with salt water from under a parking lot. It's about to matter enough for a town of 15,000 people to decide, by a show of hands at the ballot box, whether 100,000 acres next door gets filled with a dozen more buildings just like it. Mark November 3rd. Subscribe if you want the actual vote count the day it happens, not a recap 3 months later. Because this is the one Lake Mead story on this channel that isn't waiting on a snowpack or a federal committee. It's waiting on a town.